All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are starting in just a couple minutes. We're going to let people filter in and just get settled in before we start our discussion on ICWA, the SCOTUS decision, and hear from fellow members of the Indigenous community. So thanks so much for being here. We're really excited to have this conversation. So we'll just give it a couple minutes. All right, let's kick off. Welcome, everybody. I realized I was on mute, so here we go, the joys of tech. Welcome to the Inclusion Initiative's Let's Talk event. I'm Grace Foster. I'm the founder and wow, CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. So it's very nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a really long time. So the Inclusion Initiative exists to close the opportunity gap specifically for transracial adoptees and former foster youth. And we've been seeing a lot of discussions about our communities popping up these last several years. Hot topics such as, right, Joyride for the adoption community, and more recently, in June, right, we had the Supreme Court ruling on ICWA and what that meant for the Indigenous community, both for their youth that are in foster care, but also the youth that do get adopted by those families that take them in. And so we have been talking amongst our communities. What does this mean? Like, yeah, it's a big win for people who have experienced foster care, for people who are transracial adoptees. It's a big win to have an entity like SCOTUS recognize that people staying within their cultures, within their communities, is really what's best for them. But at the same time, there's the flip side of, what does it mean that these 9 justices hold all this power and can make decisions for such a broad spectrum of people that identify within these communities? And I've wanted to have this conversation for a long time. Some of you that are joining, that this event was scheduled right when the SCOTUS ruling first happened. And at the time, it was just going to be a discussion amongst adoptees, transracial adoptees in my community. And the whole reason why I am building the Inclusion Initiative is because I believe so strongly that representation of lived experiences and visibility is so critical in helping us change our narratives, in helping us really elevate and provide the resources and support for transracial adoptees and former foster youth. And I am Asian American. I'm a Korean American adoptee. I'm not an Indigenous person. And so for me, it didn't sit right that I would lead this discussion, even though it was going to be an inclusive discussion, but I didn't have people from the Indigenous community really represent as a part of leading this discussion. So I reached out to Alejandra Gomez, who is one of our guest speakers. Say hi, Alejandra.
Hi.
And yes, so thank you so much for being here. And Dwayne Stenstrom, I've also had the pleasure of connecting with. And these two have generously given of their time, given of their life experience and their knowledge of ICWA and everything that the Indigenous community is going through, but specifically the foster care and child welfare system. And so they're here to help us learn, help us understand, help us see, right, what is happening in this community, why it's important, what's the impact of the SCOTUS ruling? And when we're thinking for future generations, because this will continue happening, we're still going to have youth in foster care. We're still going to have transracial adoptions in the Indigenous community. So what should we be striving for in terms of advocacy and awareness and just more action that we can take to protect this community? And really, the question also comes into asking, like, the sacredness of the sovereignty of the Indigenous people and their land and their nations, that can't go away. And that was really a fear for many in the Indigenous community, right? That their sovereignty would be questioned, their sovereignty was at risk, and that would impact and implicate future decisions that could be made for them, about their land, about their homes, about their people. And so that's why SCOTUS ruling in favor of upholding ICWA is so important. But at the same time, right, there's other implications to that. So we're going to hear from these two incredible guest speakers that are with us today. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Alejandra Gomez. I will allow her to really share her background and her story. But again, she's a part of the foster care community that I have been lucky to be a member of and meet you through, Alejandra. So thank you for being here. And then Dwayne Stenstrom is a faculty member at, oh goodness, I'm going to butcher this, Sinte Gleska University. And he's an instructor there and really teaches students on some of this history of the Indigenous community and things like ICWA and now the SCOTUS ruling. So we're really lucky to have you here, Dwayne. Thanks so much for joining. And I wanted to kick this off and really start with hearing more about you both. And we want to hear a little bit about your background, your experience as Indigenous people who were in the foster care system, and just gain a better understanding of what that means and what that looks like for this community. And, you know, Dwayne was a part of the system 4 decades ago, Dwayne? 5 decades ago? Yeah. So this was even before ICWA was came into law. And Alejandra, was more recently a part of the foster care system as an Indigenous person. So I think we have two really unique perspectives and viewpoints on this topic. And I would love to kick it off to Alejandra first, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about your story. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Grace, especially just holding space for Indigenous people and for us to be able to just talk about this and really genuinely just hold space for what we're going to discuss. Unfortunately, the light is kind of really weird right now, but this gives more intention for you guys to hear my story and for me to be able to share with you guys. So again, my name is Alejandra. I am First Nations Ojibwe-Cree. I come from the Cochin Reservation of Ontario, Canada. And my story starts at the age of 6 to 18, where I was in the child welfare system. And just like I said, I am a part of, I'm Ojibwe-Cree, so my tribe is from Canada. And because my tribe is from Canada, I unfortunately was not protected by ICWA. And so my experience within the foster care system is within the present moment. It's been only 5 years out of the system. And within my experience in the system, I was dealt with a lot of hardships. Imagine losing your family, your language, and your traditions and having to start over. And not only are you starting over, but you're being placed with people who do not mirror your culture, your language, or your traditions. That often comes with a loss of identity and a loss of a placement or a community. And so my experience within the foster care system, I, was within foster placements that were predominantly white in Republican areas. So I experienced a lot of cultural genocide. I experienced a lot of racism and prejudiceness, and being an Indigenous kid in spaces that were not welcoming, was faced with was placed in dangerous situations where I nearly survived. So because of that experience, I now dedicate my life to changing the child welfare system on a national level for Black, Indigenous, and youth of color, but specifically within the perspective of Indigenous people, because it's important that we create space and hold space for our communities. And so I'm a national advocate, a part of NFYI, which is the National Foster Care Institute. And I discuss with Congress members, et cetera, regarding the child welfare system in ways that we can address the racism, the inequity, and the prejudiceness that's in that system and change it for the good. And I'm also an Indigenous activist that uses my platform and invest into my community to make sure that our communities are heard, BIPOC communities are represented, and there's space for all of us to be here. So thank you so much, Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your story and a little bit about your background and what you've experienced, especially like that erasure, right, of culture, of identity. And, for me as a transracial adoptee, also having been in the foster care system, but placed into a white family, a white home, I completely can relate to that. And it's something that, I didn't start reclaiming till I was in my 30s. And so, yeah, it's super important that you highlighted that and the importance of, why that impacts the work that you do today. So thank you. Okay, Dwayne, we've got 50 years of history to cram into 10 minutes, but we'd love to hear about your experience, especially when you were 8 years old, right? And then were ushered into the foster care system against your family's will. And for anyone that is listening in right now and you're interested in learning a bit more, Dwayne had a pretty amazing interview piece on NPR back in 2011. So if you search his name, search NPR and foster care, you'll find that interview piece, and I highly encourage you to read the transcript. It's really powerful. But Dwayne, would love to hear from you, your story, your experience.
Okay. Again, I want to thank both of you for being a part of this with me. This is very nervousing. um, I think I want to start first with a little story that I come across many years ago that kind of summarized what I went through. I'm going to read it very quickly and then I'll elaborate a little bit. But it says, children learn what we teach. There's a story about an eagle egg that was found by a farmer. He put the egg in the nest with one of his chickens. The egg hatched, and the eagle was raised by the chicken. He thought he was a chicken. He never learned to soar like an eagle, but only flew a few feet like a clumsy chicken. One day he saw birds soaring high about him and asked what that was. The mother hen replied, "Oh, that's an eagle. Eagles aren't like us. They can fly very high." The young eagle lived his whole life like a chicken. He never knew that he could fly like an eagle. When I looked at that story, it reminded me of basically where I had come from, where I was, and where I was going. Um, As you have indicated, at the ripe old age of 8 years old, I was removed from my reservation and I was placed in foster care. I come from a reservation in Nebraska that come under what was called at that time PL 280, the termination policy. And so a lot of us were removed. And obviously, I was no exception. When I first got into the system, my brother and I were placed in 3 foster homes. The first one, they wanted Indian kids, but then they changed their mind. The second one, they wanted Indian kids, but they only wanted one. The third one, they were getting ready to go on a vacation, and the gentleman was a minister. And his idea of vacation was to visit all the churches in the area. And my brother would not have that. He said, "No, we're not going." The last place that we were placed was about 6.5 hours from our reservation. And my understanding was that we were only to be there for a little while. I had thought maybe 4 to 6 weeks. That wasn't the case. Once we were placed there, 6 weeks turned into 6 months, which turned into 6 years, which turned into 12. I mean, it went on and on and on and on and on. And I often wondered why that all come about. And then again, as that little story indicates, there is so much about what happened to a lot of us that has been omitted out of practically anything that's educational that a lot of people don't understand. And a lot of times when we get into that idea of how does this even be possible, it's possible because there's no awareness. There's absolutely no awareness. In the foster home that I was placed in, the last one, they were good people. I have no hard feelings towards them. They did the best they could, I guess. And often when I would go back and visit with them as I got older, I would question them as to how and why everything come about the way that it did, but nobody would ever say anything. I mean, it was taboo basically to talk about. And I guess I need to preface for the audience that I'm pre-ICWA. And then I always state that in this context that it was because of people like my mother that the Indian Child Welfare Law exists today. And what I do on her behalf. My mom's rights were violated. I don't believe that she had a fair shake as to what was going on back at that time. They were saying that it was really difficult to be a woman back at that time, but it was even more difficult to be a Native woman. And so a lot of what my mom had endured basically was by herself. And then again, I think back on all of that, and the family, like I said, the family that raised me, they were good people. But they would never ever bring up the fact that I was of Native American descent. That never ever was a topic in all of those years that I had lived there. As a matter of fact, when I turned 16 and acquired a driver's license, I come from an era where driver's license weren't pictures. It was all typed out on a little card. And when you seen my name and you seen my social and you seen my age and you seen my height and weight, when you got to race, what they inquired them to do was to place a W, that I was white. And I was talking to my brother a few years back, and we come across a picture when we were first placed at this foster home, and they have us dressed up in like little cowboy gear. It's kind of cute when you think about it. But when I think back on it, I realized that the intent was that we were supposed to forget who we were. We were not supposed to have any idea of that background whatsoever. Now, that's been many years ago, obviously, and I've had a lot of time to do a lot of research just to understand, because I could not for the life of me understand why a little 8-year-old boy would be a threat. Why take everything that defines who I was? I lost my whole family. I lost my tribe. I lost my culture. I lost my spiritual. I lost everything. And I was supposed to forget about it. And I tried to get people to sit in my chair for a couple of seconds. And from age 0 to 8, you're on a reservation. You have a whole family. You have aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and good friends, bad enemy. You have that whole gamut that socialization tells you about. And then after 8, that stops. And you start another life from 8 to present. And you got to realize that even though you stopped at age 8, that life and all of those people that you knew are still functioning, but you have no contact with them. And that had always been the hardest part for me. My brother and I, when my brother turned of age, when he got his driver's license, we ran away from our foster home, and we went back. And we I was looking for my mother, and my brother was looking for family members and whatnot. But nobody seemed to want to talk about what we had been through. That whole topic seemed to be, for whatever reason, a taboo. Nobody ever talked about it. Over the years, I had made inquiries, about what had happened back then. But like I said, it was something that was just a topic that never ever came up. So I'm grateful for opportunities like this, so that people can begin to understand that the Indigenous community, the Native American community, is very alive. And there's a lot of hardships that we've been up against, but despite that, we will overcome. We have, and we will continue to. But I want people basically to understand that, as I shared on more than one occasion, that this is very, very layered. There's a lot that goes into this. And like I said, in another part of this segment, I'll talk about how you have to almost be there to really appreciate what's going on, because it still affects us today. I've learned things within the last 3 years that had a dramatic effect on me when I was still a child. I'm just now learning things. I was one of the ones that in the world, I guess, that I lived in, I was fortunate to open up my records. And after I did, I first thing was, why did I do that? Because it opened up the can of worms. And like I said, that has just been within the last 3 years. So it didn't stop as far as the impact that it has on us that have been in the system. It still impacts us to this day. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there for a second.
No, that's it's pretty incredible hearing your story. And just the fact that that was allowed, that an 8-year-old and his brother could be taken with no explanation, told that they were going to be returned in 6 weeks. And then I think you told me, right? It wasn't until you were like 40 years old that you met your sister even. So you had been gone so long that you didn't even meet members of your family till you were 40 years old.
Well, that's, I did meet my family members when I turned 20, but I met them at my mother's funeral.
Yeah.
I did find my mom after 12 years.
Yeah, that's just incredible to
5
hear.
months, 5 months after I met her, she died.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry you went through that in that kind of way. But again, it's just, it speaks to, you know, why raising awareness around your community is so important. These things are happening. They were happening all the time. They're still happening. So I'd love to unpack ICWA a little bit. You know, you mentioned that it's very layered. Like all of these things are layered within your community. So I would love to pass it to Alejandra and just hear your perspective a little bit on your perspective of ICWA, how it's impacted you, the people that you are in community with in the foster care system, and how it impacts your tribe and the Indigenous community as a whole in your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace. I definitely want to start this off with an understanding for everybody to know how purposeful and intentional we all need to be when we're, you know, in these spaces, especially hearing from a youth like me with lived experience, but not only from a present tense, but from a past tense that is still continued on, that Dwayne holds, and the sacredness that that lived experience holds. Just listening to it was just want to just highlight that of before ICWA, and then the experience going into it, and then the reconnection, and and the underlayers of trauma that not only is it like faced that he faced, but that our communities face, that is actually going to transition me into what ICWA is. So ICWA is the Indian Child Welfare Act, if you don't know. It is a vital piece of legislation that aims to keep Native American families and communities connected. It acknowledges the importance of our cultural heritage and preservations. And I want to go into just a brief history of what Dwayne was talking about with the Native American boarding schools. This also affected my community, especially on the Cochin Reservation in Ontario, Canada. My family experienced the Native American boarding schools and my grandpa, and this is going to be very triggering, but in order to change structures and in order to make an impact, we have to acknowledge history, and we have to acknowledge not only just the history, but the real truth of what's happened to our people. So because of colonization and colonialism, when they came in, the narrative was kill the Indian and save the man, that was embedded into the white supremacy of our communities. So it was not only the idea that Indigenous people, with the way that our languages were, the way that we held our traditions, were not seen as pure. And so because of this, they went through a simulation, and that was to, you know, take the youth, take the families, and separate them and put them in neighboring boarding schools. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because the foster care system is just another example of the Native American boarding schools and the hardships that our communities endured and now actively deal with. So this had to do with many youth dying. And that's why you see a lot of Indigenous people wearing orange shirts, because, you know, we want them to address that there are dead Indigenous youth in under the Christian chapels. And we need to address the crisis of our youth going into the system. And so that is just a brief history that I know that Dwayne is going to go into more, and which I'm excited for, but into the understanding of how that impacted me. Well, one, my family was in South Lake Tahoe, and my mom was an Indigenous woman, and we were around the Indigenous people that were in our location, but what I saw was heavy policing and heavily non-supportiveness within our communities, and which put me into the system and impacted me in the ways where I, like Dwayne was saying, experienced hardships and not having anyone reflect me or teach me what it was to be Indigenous and what it was to even be Chicana. And this is something that is not only with Indigenous people, but BIPOC in general within the system, is that there is somehow an erasure of our identities and a forced upon narrative that we are supposed to hold the colonial perspective of whiteness, and it embodies and takes away from ourselves, and which leaves a loss of identity. And so going through that, and then now being an adult, and how I see this impacts my community is I'm a national foster youth advocate. And so I work with Alum that are doing work to make change and to bring awareness. But I am also an Indigenous activist. So this means that I am investing into my community and understanding the awareness of what that trauma really did to our community. And what it did is it created a perpetual cycle of our people going into the system, of our people going into the prison pipeline, of a mental health crisis, of a homelessness, and continues the narrative that BIPOC people are not able to support their communities, when in actuality it's an issue of poverty and it's an issue of class that our communities are facing. And so what I see is our communities actively looking at ICWA. And during the time of when ICWA was being tested, I was a part of a group of Indigenous people where it was relentless panels, relentless meetings, relentless discussions of just trying, as if we were in chess, as if we had to really genuinely fight for our communities. And to be in that space, to just think about that, to be in a space where your identity, the color of your skin, who you are is being challenged. That creates not only does that create like a warning for us, but it creates an idea that this is okay, to be challenged, when inherently Indigenous sovereignty was structured there and placed there because of the genocide, of the ongoing erasure, of the ongoing colonization of white supremacy. And so yes, I'm going to stop there because that's a lot. But I would love to hand this to Dwayne and to talk more about this from what he's doing within his community as well. But I want to leave you with the understanding that what I see within my community right now is the need for change, and the need for us to not only bring in our communities, but to bring in elders and to bring in allies, and for allies to be in these spaces with us right now and to hear this, but not only hear this, but hear this with the intention that you are going to bring this back to your communities and educate them on an issue that is not only going to affect us, but affects BIPOC and communities that are in the foster care system in general.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Alejandra. Thank you. You and I connected on essentially, we're calling out racism in the system as people with lived experience in the system. And I remember you and I just connecting so deeply on that, on our shared mission to just help our larger society understand what that really means and looks like, and how white supremacy, colonialization, racism really have they just have really deep roots in the system, where erasure is just constantly happening. And when you said our identity, like who we are as a people, is being challenged, it's just so hard to fathom that you are essentially not recognized as people, as like a community. Um, and as a transracial adoptee, a BIPOC person that experienced the foster care system as well, I can resonate with that a little bit. And, for Korean American adoptees coming into the US, parents were taught by the institutions to just assimilate us, essentially erase any culture that we had, to deny that we were even different, right? Make us as white as possible. And, a lot in my community who have my experience of being adopted into a family with white parents in a white community, we have internalized that for decades and decades, many, many years of our lives, to where we're essentially erasing our own cultures within ourselves because we're completely rejecting it. So it's very different, right, than what you're speaking about. But my point is, we as a collective community, right, people that have experienced these systems, we have more in common than we think. And we really need to come together like this and have these conversations and be in support of one another, but also learn from each other, because together we're stronger. Together we can do something and make things move and make a difference for what the future looks like for not only youth in the system, but parents, and also what the institutions are doing, like how they're driving all of this. So I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you as a young person. I wish I would have had your gumption and your awareness and your like bravery at your age. And I love sharing this space with you and with Dwayne, because it's such a gift for me. And I hope, like, I know we're not finished with our broadcast, but man, I just hope you just continue to do this and just keep growing and growing in your efforts and your exposure, because you're a really special young individual, and you give me a lot of hope. So you help me do what I do, and you're giving me fuel for this work. So thank you so much. Okay. Dwayne, let's transition, and the same questions. So would love to hear a little bit about how you see ICWA impacting your community, the foster care system. You gave us a little bit of history and like your very unique perspective on being in the foster care system before this law was passed. So yeah, would love to hear your take.
Okay. Again, the premise that I come with is that of what happened to my mom. And again, I want people to understand that there was a lot of individuals back at that time that went through a tremendous amount of hardship, and that wasn't even acknowledged. When I got into the system, by the time ICWA was passed, I had turned of age, so I couldn't even age out. It didn't exist by the time I got into the system. Obviously, I mean, ICWA was passed in 1978. I turned 18 in 1978. So it didn't do a tremendous amount for me trying to address anything that was going on, but it did help me to understand its origin. And ICWA is a small part of a lot of atrocities that have happened to the Native American community. And I want people to basically take a look at history, because so much of this goes back. There was a policy that was passed right around between 1817 and 1846, and it was basically called the Indian Removal Act. And that's where a lot of this stuff started. And it just seems to manifest itself like every 10 years, a different policy was passed that affected us. And again, what was brought out, they were trying to do away with us. If you look at it realistically, the Native American community isn't supposed to be here. We were supposed to be gone. We were the problem. But I'm here to tell you, we plan on being here for quite a while. We ain't going anywhere anytime soon. But again, when I go back and I think about the idea of the boarding school came up. I was placed in what was called back in those days a mission. And one of the things that I did, and I had to do this for myself, I had to go back and I had to visit that place. And I remember this was about 2 years ago. I'm 62 years old, and I'm going back to this environment, and I'm all for it. I need to do this just to kind of put that in my past. And so I get up to this building, and I start getting a little bit anxious, and a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts start coming into my mind. And thankfully, my wife's with me, and there's a couple other people that are in the community that are there with me, and they're very, very supportive. They let me decide if I want to go in or not, because I'm at a level right now where I don't know if I want to do this. I'm at the door and I'm like, God, do I really want to go in there? And thankfully, again, with their support, I did. I took that step. I opened up that door and I went down into the basement, and that basement was looked upon as a place where, a lot of activities were going on. Offices were down there. There was the lunch hall, and there was all that kind of stuff was all well and good. So I was okay with that. And then I had to go up to the second floor, and right about the middle of the building is where the stair is. And so I go up to the top of the stairs. I'm on the second floor, and I go and I turn toward the south, and I start remembering what room I was in, because this is place now where our bedrooms were. And so this is, like I said, there's a lot of emotion going on here. And then I turn around and I start going back north, and I pass where we came up, and I keep going. And then all of a sudden there was like this feeling that come over me, and I stopped. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why I stopped. I mean, it was really interesting. And then I remembered that back at that time, this mission was able to house up to 60 kids, and there were male and female. Where I stopped was where the female side of the building started, and back at that time, we weren't allowed to pass that. And that, I mean, like I said, I couldn't believe that had that big of an impact on me. That I stopped almost at the very place where we were not allowed to proceed, which was really, for my purposes, that was really interesting. And I got to meet the individual, that was running this environment. And I remember driving home that night. I sent him an email and I thanked him and I expressed to him, the welcome that he gave me, to even invite me into that building. And I told him, I said, I'll be honest with you, this is the first time that I set foot in that building in 53 years. Ooh, it still bugs me. And again, like I said, when I go back into that environment, you still get overwhelmed by a lot of those kinds of things. I've learned over the years that there's been a lot of books that are coming out that are beginning to address this issue. And so a lot of people are getting triggered about, things that they're reading about, things that they're hearing about, movies that are coming out. So what you're doing now, it's great that it's happening, but we have to be mindful of the fact that it's going to affect a lot of people. And I'm hoping that resources are available so that people can, have a place to go. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like I shared with you before, there's not a book out there to help us kind of meander our way through this process. And again, like I shared, imagine you woke up this morning for the first time and acknowledged you were of Native American descent. What do you do with that? Or you woke up this morning, you acknowledge you are Native American descent, and you know what tribe you come from. What do you do with that? Or you woke up this morning, you know you're of Native American descent, you know your tribe, and you know your family. The thousands of questions that come along with that, like, why did they give me up? Why was I taken away? There's nothing there that gives us, how we're going to approach that. ICWA, I think now that it's becoming a little bit more public, there's a lot of us that have gone through this that, we're willing to share. I went through that roller coaster. One of the things that I share, and I have no problem sharing it, was when I was in the system many years ago, prior to the Indian Child Welfare Act being passed, being taken away, and the trauma that I experienced, I got caught up in the addiction world. I consider myself today a recovering alcoholic. I quit drinking January 4th of 1980. You do the math. I'm going on 44 years of drug and alcohol free, and it's only because I found my way back to the reservation.
Yeah.
I realized that what I was doing when I was in that frame of mind was I was just perpetuating what everybody was saying we were. And I decided that enough is enough. I quit doing that. My kids, my oldest daughter will be 43. She's never seen a can of beer in my hand. Like I said before, I'm a father of 6. I'm a grandfather of 15 and a great grandfather of 7. And so I have my work cut out for me. And when I see these kinds of things happening, it's very reassuring for me to know that, for a while there, and I think the young lady can agree with me, sometimes you feel like you're all alone. Who do we talk to? Where do we turn?
Yes.
Some people that may think that they kind of understand, once we start talking to them, they kind of back away, like, I don't know if I want to continue this conversation. And I have to respect that.
Yeah, it's a
not
hard,
an easy topic. Yeah.
yes, it's a hard conversation to have. And I think that's, the three of us really can relate to each other in that regard when we're speaking to people that do not understand what it is to be in the foster care system, people that do not understand what it means to be told, like, your culture, where you come from doesn't matter. It is a very hard conversation to navigate because, right, our society has been conditioned to brush it aside. It's no big deal. You're American, so it's no big deal. And what we're seeing now with conversations like this and other really great advocates in the foster care space, in the adoption space, in the policy space, like, we're all starting to have these hard conversations publicly because the awareness and education is so important. So YouTube being on here is making such a huge difference in terms of how people are able to be educated around your community. So, you're both, like, doing such great work. And, just you being here means so much. And I want to pivot a little bit because this particular question about the SCOTUS ruling, I have been extremely interested in hearing what you both think about the recent ruling upholding ICWA, of course. I know that there are so many in the Indigenous community, maybe all, maybe everyone, that's very happy with a decision, as you should be, right? Because it's upholding your sovereignty of your nations. But one part of it that really does not sit well with me, right, are these 9 justices that do not have any lived experience as an Indigenous person, do not have any experience as a former foster youth making these decisions. So, of course, we know Justice Amy Coney Barrett has adopted transracially. So I believe she's adopted 2 children from Haiti. I believe Justice Gorsuch has also adopted. I can't remember. I really need to fact check that. My apologies. So they are the adoptors, white people that are adopters of people of color. And it really bothers me that they, especially Justice Amy Coney Barrett, gets to write the majority opinion on this issue and have that be like the tone for the country of this issue. And yes, while the decision was positive for our community, it does not sit right with me. So I'm curious what you think. I also would like to hear what you think the impact of this decision is for your community at large. Like, there's other implications to this. So, Alejandra, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for, creating context around the decision makers that are leading this nation right now. And I know that for me and my peers, we are seeing a regression in just the LGBT community, within women's productive rights, within so many things that are changing. So just want to acknowledge that. But to go back into the Indian Child Welfare Act, it was, this was actually a conversation that we had statewide, and we talked about. And actually, interesting enough, I was talking to Congressmember Judy Shu about ICWA and my experience the day before they ruled over it, the courts ruled over it. So as I was going to the airport, did I have one of my colleagues who's Indigenous call me, and both of us just cry over the fact that we felt like, that we were safe and that things were okay. And that, because there was always a discussion. It's always interesting to think about how, like I said before, the game of chess. So not only were we thinking about our next move, but we were thinking about what moves are we going to make if they do deny this, because it was the understanding that the people that were backing up the case were oil companies that were wanting to take land, and specifically land like trying to make oil mines in certain places of Indigenous land. And what is the best way to take land? It is to take away the families and rip families away. So they thought ICWA would be a really good stance to back. But one, it was a celebration. It was it was a celebration, but it was also an experience that we had statewide, where we actually talked about this. And it was this idea that, like how I said before, our identities were tested, our sovereignty was questioned. And so I'm going to name actually off some of the things that we were thinking about. One, Strengthening Tribals Family Act. That was the act that I was talking to Congressmember Judy Shu about, because just like Dwayne was saying, that within the Indian Child Welfare Act, there's certain aspects that they can poke at. And so data collection is one of those things that statewide and federally that we need to strengthen. and that we need to and to look into. And so it was that idea that we needed to really think about where within the Indian Child Welfare Act are our strengths and our weaknesses, and to think about from a different narrative, because it's always important to hear different opinions and to be able to sit there, because it helps be able to see a different perspective of what others may be saying. So it was that idea that we needed to not only strengthen the Indian Child Welfare Act, but have conversations like we are right now, which are honest, and to be able to talk about this and to give our peers and give our allies knowledge on the Indian Child Welfare Act and why it's so crucial to our people. Not it, and to take away the bias of the understanding that it is a race issue. It is a issue that is, and in some ways can be questioning people's like what they can and can't do. But it was an understanding that this is for Indigenous sovereignty because of the history, that because of everything that's happened to people. So we, we're thinking about development in communication with federal levels. It was, when we are talking to these federal people, having a voice of lived experience, somebody that can talk about their lived experience on why ICWA helped, a perspective of not having ICWA. And not only was it having that, but it was having a policy expertise, somebody that can be in that room and to be able to speak the policy language. Because unfortunately, political language and policy language and certain languages are not always accessible to our communities, and is a disadvantage to our people trying to advocate for the things that we need. So to have people with the policy expertise and to have that voice of experience too is are other ways that we can support and we can decolonize the perspective of ICWA from the colonial standpoint. And again, it was, looking into understanding the narrative of what it was to be Native, but what it actually was protecting community and our identities. So it was also too, like what we're discussing, right, about ICWA, is educating us on what the Indian Child Welfare Act is, but having that be federally and statewide, because I had moments when I actually was talking to representatives and I brought up ICWA, and it was extremely awing to have them tell me, I don't know what that is. And for me, I was like, but you are in the government. So I'm a little confused on why you don't know what the Indian Child Welfare Act is. So it is really important that not only do we educate ourselves and we educate our communities, but that the government be educated on this as well, from all three perspectives. And again, understanding why data collection is so important, and et cetera. So so that was kind of just something of a takeaway of that I got from our statewide acknowledge. And actually, we're going to be doing this nationally as well in New Mexico, to be discussing the experiences from all diverse backgrounds. And again, it's a game of chess. And so it's now understanding where can we strengthen and what do we need to address that is our weak points. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks so much for your very important perspective. And I love that you have, the direct experience of hearing from these policymakers, these lawmakers. That's really, really important. So thank you for sharing that. And Dwayne, same question for you then. What do you think the impact of this ruling is for your community at large, for the future? And how do you feel about these 9 very powerful individuals who don't have lived experience really setting the tone for this issue for the country on your behalf?
I guess for my purposes, these 9 individuals that you are referring to are individuals that now have a sense of awareness that they may not have had in the beginning. And that goes back to, the opening of my Children Learn What We Teach. There's a whole part of history, again, that's being left out. And as Andrew talked about, so many people are unaware. And I think this ruling will help bring that awareness to light, where people will, for once, start realizing its significance. Again, for the Native American community, it basically said that we have a right to exist and we will continue to exist because they've had for many, many years done everything in their power to eliminate us. And like I said, when we get into the policy component, there's quite a few of them that are out there. One example that I have is like I said in the beginning, I come from a termination era. The intent of termination was to do away with the Indian problem. And the way they were going to do that was take the kids, at any cost. And unfortunately, the cost was always on the kids. I lost everything out of that. But the fact that it stood its ground, ICWA in general stood its ground, and was not overturned, I think is going to send a message not only to people that are kind of curious about it, but to those that knew something of it, but now may take a little bit more time to read it again in its entirety. As Alejandra pointed out, there are certain parts of it that we find that is being manipulated. One of the components in there talks about emergency placement, where they come and they take the kids and they're not following that. They're using that basically to their advantage. And like I said, I appreciate what they're doing. But I think if more people become aware of why they're doing it, I think that's it's gonna open a lot more eyes. People are gonna begin to understand that years ago, our forefathers, our elders, made a comment that what they do to us, they do to themselves. And what that simply means is everything that they have done to the Native American community, they're going to do to all other entities if they don't start paying attention to what's going on. And by this ruling coming to light, I think more people are going to start paying attention to what's going on in their own communities. I mean, it almost has to. I look today at, where our government is, and it is very, very scary. I remember a story, and I know this isn't story hour, but I want to share this. When I was taken from my mom and I got into the system, I asked one of the welfare workers many, many years ago, do you feel that I would have been able to stay with my mother had there been an adult male in my home? And they said, well, I can't answer that for sure, but I'm sure that would have a really big impact. And I said, that's interesting to me because I had 2 brothers that would have qualified as adult males. And they were drafted into Vietnam. And that's the only reason why they weren't there. So when my brothers came back, like I said, when we were taken, my brother was just going into Vietnam. And when he came back, we were nowhere to be found. And I didn't find him again for 12 years.
Yeah.
And so when we had that conversation, I look at what our government, what they're doing today. And unfortunately, of the 7 of us that was in my family, my 6 siblings, there was only 2 of us left. And like I said, 5 of them have passed on. But I think that my brother would have been ashamed of what he saw, back in when the United States Capitol was taken over.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, those individuals, the Congress is what I'm referring to. In my opinion, they should have stood their ground and stayed at the front of the door instead of going and doing what they did. I think about what my brother went through, and I think he would have been ashamed
Yeah.
to do that.
No,
Now, I
that's
don't know if that's the right thing to say, but I'm talking about what I experience all the time.
yeah. No, it's an important.
Nobody wants to hear that side of it. But like I said, in the culture that I come up in, when you say that you stand behind something and you defend it, you stand there and you defend it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
that's
that'll be a conversation. I know that's going to be coming down the pipe, but that's the point that I want to make. Like my brothers, both of my brothers were Vietnam veterans.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that perspective. We thank them for their service. Absolutely. And I mean, it just shows this is telling of just that we're scratching the surface on this conversation, right?
Yeah.
There's so much, like you said, Dwayne, in the beginning, there's layers and layers and layers and layers attached to this. And so I do want to pause briefly here because I would love to give our audience an opportunity. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, everybody, I've been scrolling. Like if you have questions, please provide them in the comments. And then we can have our two panelists here address your questions. So we'll give a minute for folks to do that if they would like to. So please, within the LinkedIn event, there's a comment section, everybody, and just drop your questions there and I will see them. But in the meantime, I would love to kick it back to Alejandra. And I would love for you to share. And I know you've probably have said this throughout this event, but would love for you to reiterate and share the key thing that you want our audience to really take away from your experience and what you've shared here tonight.
Yeah, I think one, I can acknowledge that when we hear so many multiple perspectives and you're sitting there and listening and you're trying to take everything in, it can be kind of confusing, or it can be a lot to take in at some points because you're hearing from perspectives of state, of lived experience, of future, of past. And so what I always tell my community and what I always tell everybody is to understand and walk in purpose and intention, you know, whether that intention when you first came in here was to listen and to get an idea. Now think of your purpose, you know, now that you have an idea that the Indian Child Welfare Act is, at the end of the day, it is not an issue regarding race. This is an issue regarding acknowledging Indigenous sovereignty and acknowledging. I just want to make sure that I'm like saying all of this, but acknowledging Indigenous sovereignty and acknowledging that the Indigenous people. And so to bring out of this, what I want for my community and what I want for all of you is to move with purpose now and to share this with your community, whether that is literally just being like, hey, have you heard of ICWA? Or hey, I actually just heard about this panel that I was in, because I think society, sometimes we don't understand how powerful we are, and the word of tongue, and being in communal spaces, because we assume that the power is within the authority figures when it's within our communities. It's within knowledge of our communities. It's within cultivating that love and that care, and knowing that by you all being here, you're making an impact. And by you all being here, that you are changing and you are growing and developing your mind and to have increased knowledge. So I want to acknowledge you all and thank you all for being here first, but to also again move with purpose, because you are all purposeful and have very important things to share with your communities. So let ICWA be something that you share with your community and help acknowledge and aid us in our and us just wanting to make sure our communities are heard and safe and protected.
I love that. move with intention and purpose and support. Thank you. Dwayne, same question for you. You're on mute, Dwayne.
I think what I'm going to do is just read a part of what the Indian child welfare law said. And I'll be very quick about it. The Congress hereby declares that it is this policy of the nation to protect the best interest of Indian children and to promote the stability and security of Indian tribes and families by the establishment of minimum federal standards for the removal of Indian children from their families and place them in place of such children in foster or adoptive homes which will reflect the unique value of Indian culture. What I always hear about ICWA is best interest of the child, and then they stop. There's more to it. Aside from the best interest of the child, it talks about the families and the tribe. And that needs to be talked about a lot more than it is. Again, I encourage people to take the time to read the law and really, really understand it and appreciate it, if nothing else. Like I said at the beginning of this talk, I come before the law was passed, and we have individuals today that, were affected by the law, thankfully, and they're still maintaining some kind of culture within their own lives. Myself today, I'm a foster parent. I am currently taking care of my great-granddaughter, and I took her from the state, and I had them place her back in amongst our tribe. And that's, that showed me that this law has a place. My granddaughter is keeping me like going 24/7. And I didn't think that was ever going to happen. But like I said, it's a good thing. And people need to look at it as such. We're always going to have people's own opinions about things, and I respect that. Whenever I talk to anybody, I always tell them my intention isn't to change your belief about something. I'm just saying, look at the whole story. There's a lot more that should have been told and hasn't been. And it's venues like this, I think, that kind of get that going. So again, I'm very appreciative of what's happening tonight, and I certainly appreciate everybody that took the time to attend.
Yes, that was beautifully said, Dwayne. Thank you. Well, we're coming up on time, and I think we will share how to get in touch with our wonderful speakers. So LinkedIn handle, I'm sorry, wow, I'm an older millennial here. LinkedIn link, Instagram handles, and emails are all on the screen for all of you for if you want to get in touch with Dwayne, Alejandra, or myself. And again, cannot thank you all enough for really being allies tonight to come, listen, learn, and support. It means a lot to us who have lived experience in the foster care community, in the adoption community, but most importantly, it means a lot to the folks on this panel who are part of the Indigenous community and representing that community tonight. So thank you so much for joining. Again, I'm Grace Foster. I'm founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. I hope that you will be in touch. I hope you'll continue to support our efforts. We hold these events monthly, so sign up to our newsletter to learn about the next exciting event for our community. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you again, Alejandra. Thank you, Dwayne. Really appreciate you. Good night, everyone. Bye.